The sledgehammer felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was the weight of everything else Daniel Carter was carrying. The grief that sat like a stone in his chest, the responsibility of raising a 6-year-old daughter alone, the crushing silence of a house that used to be filled with laughter. He swung anyway. The drywall crumbled easily, decades of paint and plaster giving way to reveal the skeleton of the old Victorian home. Dust filled the air, catching the afternoon light that streamed through the tall windows. Daniel coughed, stepping back to survey his work. This was the third house he'd taken on in 2 years. Each one a project, each one a distraction, each one a way to avoid the empty spaces in his own life. "Daddy, can I help?" Emma appeared in the doorway, her small hands clutching a toy hammer he'd bought her at the hardware store. She was wearing her mother's old gardening hat, far too big for her head. The brim nearly covered her eyes. Daniel's heart clenched. She looked so much like Sarah in that moment, the same determined set of her jaw, the same hopeful brightness in her eyes that refused to acknowledge when something might be too difficult. "Not with the sledgehammer, sweetheart," he said gently, kneeling down to her level. "But I bet those old floorboards could use some inspection. Think you can check for loose nails?" Emma nodded seriously, as if he'd given her the most important job in the world. She marched over to the corner and began her careful examination, tapping each board with her toy hammer and listening intently. Daniel returned to the wall. The previous owners had said the house was built in 1887, that it had been in the same family for generations before being sold to a series of investors who'd let it fall into disrepair. It was a mess. Cracked foundation, outdated electrical, plumbing that belonged in a museum. But Daniel saw potential. He always did. Maybe that's why he kept buying these broken places. Because he couldn't fix what was broken in himself, but he could fix these walls, these floors, these foundations. He positioned the sledgehammer for another swing when Emma called out, "Daddy, there's writing on the floor." Daniel set down his tool and walked over. Sure enough, beneath the dust and grime, someone had carved words into one of the old floorboards. The letters were crude but deliberate. "For Sarah, who taught me that home is not a place but a feeling." MH 1924, inched the name hit him like a physical blow. Sarah. His Sarah had been gone for 2 years, taken by a sudden aneurysm that gave them no time to say goodbye. No time to prepare Emma for a world without her. Mother. No time for Daniel to learn how to be enough on his own. "That's Mommy's name," Emma said quietly. "It is," Daniel managed, "but it's a different Sarah, sweetheart." It was a popular name back then, too. Emma traced the letters with her small finger. "I bet she was nice, like Mommy. I bet she was." Daniel stood, needing to move, needing to work. He returned to the wall and swung hard. A large section collapsed, and with it, something fluttered to the floor, a cascade of paper and debris, and among it, a photograph. Emma scrambled to pick it up. "Daddy, look." Daniel took the photo from her dust-covered hands and felt the world tilt. The woman in the photograph was standing in front of this very house, circa 1920s based on her dress and the car parked in the background. She was smiling, one hand shading her eyes from the sun, the other resting on her swollen belly. She was beautiful in that timeless way. But that wasn't what made Daniel's hands shake. She looked exactly like his wife. The same dark hair that caught auburn in the light, the same slight gap between her front teeth, the same way of standing, weight shifted to one hip, head tilted just so. Even the smile, that particular expression of joy mixed with mischief that had been so uniquely Sarah's, was identical. "She looks like Mommy," Emma whispered, peering at the photo. Daniel couldn't speak. He turned the photograph over. Written in faded ink, "Sarah Margaret Harrison, Spring 1924. 6 months along. We're going to fill this house with love and laughter." It's just a coincidence," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. People can look alike. But he'd been married to Sarah for 8 years. He knew every expression, every gesture, every angle of her face. And this woman from a century ago, didn't just resemble his wife. She could have been her twin. Emma tugged his sleeve. Maybe it's a sign. A sign of what, baby? That Mommy wants us to know she's okay, that she's still with us. Daniel pulled his daughter close, burying his face in her hair, so she wouldn't see the tears forming. He didn't believe in signs. He believed in what he could build with his hands, what he could measure and repair and make solid. Signs were for people who had the luxury of hope. But he slipped the photograph into his pocket anyway. Over the next week, Daniel threw himself into the renovation with renewed intensity. He worked until his muscles ached, until exhaustion was the only thing that could quiet his mind. But the photograph stayed with him, tucked in his wallet, taken out at odd moments when Emma wasn't looking. He told himself he was being ridiculous. It was just a face, just a woman from another time who happened to share some features with his late wife. Nothing more. But the coincidence gnawed at him. On Saturday, Daniel took Emma to the County Historical Society, a dusty building downtown that smelled of old paper and floor polish. The woman at the desk, elderly with kind eyes magnified by thick glasses, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Daniel pulled out the photograph. "I found it." Daniel felt exposed, but he didn't deny it. It was true. Late at night, when Emma was asleep, he'd sit in the dark living room of their rental house and talk to Sarah's photograph, telling her about Emma's day, about the houses he was working on, about how much he missed her. The historian smiled gently. "Then your daddy understands Matthew Harrison better than most. Love doesn't die when people do. It just changes shape." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a folder. "We have more photographs of the family, if you'd like to see them, and some letters." For the next hour, Daniel and Emma pored over the archives. There were photographs of Matthew and Sarah together, young and radiant with new love. Pictures of Matthew alone with a baby girl, then a toddler, then a growing child. In every photo, Matthew looked tired but determined, the weight of single, parenthood evident in the lines around his eyes. But there was something else, too, a gentle strength, a quiet pride. He'd kept his promise. He'd filled that house with love. One letter, written by Matthew's daughter when she was grown, stood out. "People always pitted my father for losing my mother so young, but I never felt that he was bitter or broken. He taught me that grief and love are two sides of the same coin. That missing someone deeply means you love them deeply, and that's a gift, not a curse. He showed me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room for both the sadness and the joy, the memory and the present moment. Because of how he loved my mother, even after she was gone, I knew how to love fearlessly. He gave me that." Daniel's vision blurred. He read the passage again, then again. "Daddy," Emma touched his arm. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, baby, I'm okay." But he wasn't, not really. Because for 2 years, he'd been so focused on not breaking down, on holding himself together for Emma's sake, that he'd built walls around his grief. He'd convinced himself that moving forward meant leaving Sarah behind, that healing meant finding a way to stop missing her so much. He bought house after house, telling himself each renovation would be the one that finally fixed him, that would finally fill the emptiness. But all he'd done was create more space between himself and his own heart. The historian was watching him with understanding. "Are you all right, dear?" Daniel carefully gathered the letters. Would it be possible to make copies of some of these?" "Of course." That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel returned to the Victorian house on Maple Street. He brought a camping chair and a thermos of coffee, and he sat in the gutted living room, surrounded by exposed studs and piles of lumber, and he read Matthew Harrison's letters by lamplight. They were remarkable documents, honest, raw, full of grief but also full of determination. Matthew wrote about the crushing loneliness of those early days, the terror of being solely responsible for an infant, the way he'd talked to Sarah's picture and begged her to tell him what to do. But he also wrote about joy, about his daughter's first word, first step, first day of school, about the way grief began to coexist with happiness, how he could miss Sarah desperately while also feeling grateful for what they'd had, for the daughter she'd given him. In one letter to his brother, written 5 years after Sarah's death, Matthew wrote, "You asked if I'm ready to move on, to find someone new, but I think you misunderstand what moving on means. It doesn't mean replacing Sarah or pretending she never existed. It means making a new life that honors what we had, while also allowing for what could be. I'm not trying to forget her. I'm trying to live in a way that would make her proud. I'm trying to show our daughter that love is stronger than death, that people can be broken and still build beautiful things." Daniel set down the letter, his hands shaking. Through the tall windows, moonlight spilled across the damaged floors, illuminating the carved inscription Emma had found. "For Sarah, who taught me that home is not a place but a feeling." Matthew had understood something Daniel was only beginning to grasp. A house was just wood and nails, until you filled it with presence, with intention, with the daily acts of love that transformed space into sanctuary. Daniel had been trying to fix these houses as a substitute for fixing himself. But maybe that had been the wrong approach all along. Maybe he didn't need to be fixed. Maybe he just needed to accept that he was forever changed, and that was okay. He pulled out his phone and looked at his screensaver. A photo of Sarah holding newborn Emma, both of them exhausted and radiant. For 2 years, looking at this picture, it felt like pressing on a bruise, a pain he couldn't avoid but also couldn't bear. Now something had shifted. He still felt the ache of missing her, but underneath it was something else. Gratitude. She had been his. He had been hers. They'd had 8 years that had changed him irrevocably, had given him Emma, had taught him what it meant to build a life with someone, and that life didn't end just because she did. "I've been doing this all wrong," Daniel said to the empty room, to the ghost of Matthew Harrison, to Sarah's memory. "I've been running from you, running from how much it hurts. But I don't want to run anymore. I want to figure out how to carry you with me, how to be the dad Emma needs while also honoring what we had." The house settled around him, old wood creaking, and it felt less like decay and more like conversation. When Daniel came home the next morning, Emma was already awake, eating cereal at the kitchen table of their rental. "Did you sleep at the house?" she asked. "Yeah, I did some thinking." "About Mommy?" Daniel sat down across from her. "About a lot of things. About how I've been so scared of being sad that I haven't let myself remember the good parts. About how I thought fixing houses would somehow fix me, but that's not how it works." Emma considered this seriously, a trait she definitely inherited from Sarah. "You don't need fixing. Daddy, you're just sad. That's different." The simple wisdom of it nearly broke him. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't always listen." She grinned, and there was Sarah in that grin, mischievous and bright. "You're right. I'm going to do better." Daniel reached across the table and took his daughter's small hand. "I want to tell you more about Mommy. Not just the sad parts, but everything. The funny parts, the silly parts, all of it. Because she was amazing, and you deserve to know her, even if you can't remember her." Emma's eyes shone. "I like that. And I want to finish the house on Maple Street, but differently, not as a distraction, as something we do together, a way to honor the people who live there, who love there, Matthew and his Sarah, and our Sarah too. Can we make it beautiful?" "We can make it full of love," Daniel said, which is the same thing. Over the following months, Daniel and Emma transformed the Victorian house, but this renovation was different from all the others. Daniel worked slower, with more intention. He preserved original details that he might have ripped out before: the carved woodwork, the old fixtures, the worn floorboards with their secret inscriptions. Emma helped, painting her careful 6-year-old masterpieces on canvas boards that Daniel hung throughout the house. They planted a garden in the overgrown yard, filling it with the same flowers Sarah had loved: lavender and black-eyed Susans and wild roses. Daniel framed the photograph of Sarah Margaret Harrison and hung it in the entryway, along with a picture of his own Sarah. 2 women, a century apart, who looked like they could have been sisters. 2 men who'd loved them, who'd been broken by loss but had chosen to build anyway. One Saturday, as they were working on the front porch, an elderly woman stopped on the sidewalk. "I grew up in this house," she said, leaning on her cane. "My grandfather built it. My father raised me here after my mother died." Daniel set down his paintbrush. "You're Matthew Harrison's granddaughter?" Her face lit up. "You know about my grandparents?" "I found a photograph of your grandmother. She looked just like my late wife. It's the strangest thing." The woman climbed the porch steps slowly, accepting Daniel's offered arm. She looked around at the restoration work, her eyes growing misty. "He would have loved what you're doing. Grandpa Matthew always said this house had a soul, that it deserved to be filled with people who understood what it meant to love even when it hurt. He sounded like he was a wise man. He missed my grandmother every day of his life. But he didn't let that stop him from living fully, from loving me fiercely, from finding joy in small things. He taught me that grief is just love with nowhere to go, so you have to find new places to put it. In work that matters, in people you care for, in beauty you create." She touched the doorframe, tracing the old wood. "I'm so glad someone like you bought this place. Someone who understands." After she left, Daniel sat on the porch steps with Emma tucked against his side. The afternoon sun was warm, and the newly planted flowers were just beginning to bloom. "Daddy," Emma said, "I think I understand now." "Understand what, sweetheart? Why you keep fixing houses? You're not running away from being sad about Mommy. You're making places where sad people can start to feel better. Like this house helped Grandpa Matthew, and now it's helping us." Daniel felt tears slip down his cheeks, but they weren't entirely sad tears anymore. "I think you might be right." "I'm always right," Emma said with perfect 6-year-old confidence. Then, more quietly, "I miss Mommy, but I'm glad I have you. I'm glad I have you too, baby. So glad." They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the old Victorian in shades of gold and amber. Daniel thought about Matthew Harrison, sitting in this same spot a century ago, probably holding his own daughter, probably missing his own Sarah with the same fierce ache that Daniel felt. But Matthew had found a way forward. He'd raised his daughter with such love that, decades after his death, she still spoke of him with reverence. He'd kept his promise to Sarah. He'd filled the house with love and laughter, even when his heart was breaking. Daniel could do the same, not by fixing himself or by forgetting Sarah or by pretending the grief didn't exist, but by letting the love he still felt for her fuel everything he did. Every house he restored, every story he told Emma, every choice he made about the kind of man and father he wanted to be. The house wasn't finished yet. It might take another year, maybe 2, but that was okay. Some things weren't meant to be rushed. Healing was like renovation. You had to take it one room at a time, one day at a time, honoring what was broken while believing that something beautiful could still be built. Daniel looked down at Emma, who'd fallen asleep against his shoulder, and then up at the house that had brought them both to this moment of understanding. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah Margaret Harrison, to Matthew, to his own Sarah, to whatever force in the universe had led him to this place. The house seemed to whisper back, "You're welcome. Now keep building." And he would. If you're watching this right now, from wherever you are in the world, I want to thank you for spending this time with me, with Daniel and Emma, with the Harrison story across time. Maybe this story found you when you needed it most. Maybe you're healing from your own loss. Maybe you're learning to carry grief and joy in the same heart. Maybe you're just beginning to understand that being broken and still building beautiful things aren't contradictions. They're the same act of courage. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a realization, I'd be honored if you'd share it. What lesson did you take away? What moment resonated most? Daniel learned that home isn't a place, but a feeling. That grief is just love with nowhere to go. That we don't need to be fixed. We just need to keep building one day at a time. If that message reached you, If you felt seen by this story, please hit that like button and consider subscribing. This channel is dedicated to stories like this one, about healing, about second chances, about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage in the quiet moments of their lives. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, wherever you are on your journey, you're not alone. We're all just doing our best to build something beautiful from the broken pieces. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.